Welcome to another exciting episode of The Business of Sound. My name is David Sagura. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Glassbox Media and the host for this podcast. Our goal is to provide you with an inside look into the world of podcasting with actionable tips and strategies to help you achieve greater success with your podcast. Join us every Thursday as we bring you expert insights and exclusive interviews with some of the industry's leading voices. But before we get started, be sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating to stay up to date with all the latest episodes of The Business of Sound. Today, we have a very special episode. We are honored to have Gary Arndt as our guest today, host at Everything Everywhere Daily podcast. He's a renowned travel blogger with over a decade of experience, and Gary has become a leading authority not just on travel, but history and education as well. In fact, Time Magazine recognized him as one of the top 25 best blogs on the internet back in 2010, and Gary's received a number of other awards from the Society of American Traveler Writers and the North American Travel Journalists Association. Welcome, Gary.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, my pleasure. And I guess with that in mind, let's just dive right into it. I guess the question I'm sure on a lot of listeners' minds, and certainly for people out there in the industry, is you have a very successful, blog, everythingeverywhere.com. What made you decide to jump into podcasting, and has it gone as you expected?
Well, I've been podcasting for a long time. I started back in 2009 with a show called This Week in Travel, and I had two other co-hosts, and we kind of just did it as a hobby. We never made a dime off of it in 11 years. And the thing that caused me to start doing this podcast was the pandemic. I never, ever even considered the idea that the entire global travel and tourism industry could just vanish and do so quickly. And that's basically what happened. In a period of a few weeks in March of 2020, everything just disappeared. All the contracts that I had for photography, a event that I was going to be hosting for other travel influencers, everything just up and vanished. And I had some doubts about where the travel media industry was going with blogging. Everything when I first started, I had it was a blog. I was traveling, I was just writing my thoughts, and people would follow the website primarily through RSS. They would look at it in the reader, and every morning I would have something to say about where I was visiting. And that ended over a period of time when Google killed Google Reader, and social media rose, and now social media was where you followed people. You didn't go directly to their website. And then sites like Facebook kind of pulled a switcheroo, and they destroyed organic traffic, and they made you pay for everything. And all the traffic to blogs were now coming from SEO. And what happened is, rather than making them personal expressions of the writer, they became nothing more than SEO. That's all it was. So every website was doing kind of the same thing. 15 things to do in Las Vegas, 15 things to do in London. And it was just because that's what people were looking for, so That's all they wrote. And I didn't like that. That's not what I wanted to do. It's not why I got into the business. And over on social media, things weren't better. Instagram became extremely shallow. It became people taking selfies. When I posted a photo, it didn't matter how good the photo was. If it was a photo of a mountain or a rainbow, it would get a lot of likes. If it was a photo of a person, it would not. And so I didn't like where it was going even before the pandemic started. And when the pandemic hit, I kind of had to do some sort of pivot because I couldn't rely on the travel industry anymore. But I also didn't want to lose all the experience that I had gained from traveling around the world for 13 years. And I had this idea for a show a couple years ago. My original idea was longer episodes that and I ended up doing research for the first show, and I had enough to maybe do like 2 or 3 hours. And I kind of did the math, and I realized doing a 2 to 3 hour show once every other week was not really a good business decision. That unless you had an enormously large audience like Dan Carlin or something on Hardcore History, you couldn't make it viable. So I kind of put the idea away, even though I had the artwork made, which is my current show artwork. I had the music all picked out. I already purchased the rights to it. And I met a friend at a conference we were both speaking at. We went to a speaker's event, and he was telling me that he started a daily podcast, and it was the best thing he had ever done.
Oh, wow.
And I thought about that and I did the math and I realized, well, this works out a lot better than doing, infrequent longer shows. That you're getting more of a, I don't know what to call it, but like a greater advertising surface area so even if you had, say, 10,000 downloads an episode, by publishing more, you're able to get more revenue from doing something smaller. And because you're chopping it up every day, if you had 60 to 70 minutes worth of content all at once and you put 14 ads on it, that would probably be considered onerous by most people. But if you just do 2 a day, then nobody really has a problem with that. And so I realized, wow, this really does make sense. And from a whole host of reasons. So I dove in, I came up with the format and the idea for the show. And basically it was like, I did the show that I wish existed and that I wanted to listen to. And I figured that if I liked it and I was curious and interested in these things, there's got to be other people out there as well. So July 1st, 2020, I started just because it was the first day of the third quarter and it made all my analytics easier. And I've been doing it for almost 3 years now.
Oh, wow. It's amazing. So obviously you just explained it all, your background, your passion. But when people say they travel a lot, they probably don't understand like what sort of scale we're talking about here. So I already know the answer, I think, but I'm going to ask you, put you on the spot. How many countries have you visited?
Depends how you define country. Because that's not a cop-out.
Yeah.
So if you look at just the list of UN countries, I've been to 130. Wow. But I've been to a lot of places that are not traditionally considered countries, like Antarctica, French Polynesia, Gibraltar, the Falkland Islands, Taiwan, Palestine, a lot more, especially in like territories in the Pacific and things like that. So if you look at the Traveler Century Club list, they divide the world into 326 places now. I've been to 204 on that list. And I've been to every U.S. state twice, probably close to 3 times, every Canadian province 3 times, every state in Germany, every state in South Africa, Australia. So it's not just like I'm, landing in the capital city airport and declaring victory. I'm doing road trips and driving around a lot of these places as well.
It's probably impossible to quantify, but I'm going to ask you anyways. What is the most memorable trip or location you ever visited?
The answer I always give to this question, I don't even know if it's true, but it's kind of become my stock answer, is South Georgia Island. South Georgia is where Ernest Shackleton rescued his men. It's where he's buried today. It's located between Africa and South America, above Antarctica. It's one of the largest penguin breeding grounds in the world. Stunningly beautiful and very difficult to get to. You cannot fly there. There is no runway. The only way to get there is by ship. And normally people go when they're on a trip to Antarctica. And for the crews on the ships that go to Antarctica, South Georgia is always the highlight of the season because not every voyage gets to go there. But just stepping off the Zodiac when you get on the beach and seeing 250,000 penguins that have no fear of you, it's loud, it smells horrible, and there's nothing else like it in the world.
Oh, wow. That's pretty different. I can't say I'm going to travel there myself, but pretty interesting. I guess another related question, again, it makes sense that you would pursue this craft and, do so with such gusto, but I am curious, there's a lot of competition in the travel, history, and education categories, and you're square, centered in smack double of it. What I want to know is what tactics or tools have you used to help stand out from the crowd? Because I will say statistically, the odds would have been against you, and you've actually managed to overcome those.
Most of the shows in history deal with one topic, and I believe they largely found their success on SEO, which doesn't mean they're bad shows, but people are searching for the history of the United States. They are going to find the podcast called The History of the United States, The History of Rome, The History of England. And if you look at the most successful shows, for the most part, that's exactly what they're titled. So they're kind of the thing that people are searching for. My show is not what people are searching for. No one is saying, I want a podcast about everything. right? They discover it. And if you look at the reviews people leave, a common word that's used is that it becomes addictive. So instead of a single focus where I go extremely deep, and I've listened to many of those podcasts where they spend hundreds of hours on one topic, I decided to take the opposite approach and take a shotgun approach and cover everything just a little bit, to sort of like an introduction to certain topics. And I do episodes where someone may spend an entire career and get a PhD studying something I'm going to try to encapsulate in 10 minutes. So I think that's the thing I did. And I think there's also a recognition that for listeners that what I'm doing is actually kind of difficult, that putting out a show like this every day, it's not a daily show where I'm just chatting with my co-host about the daily events. I am writing a 2,000-word script every day. That's the equivalent of a term paper, right? I'm researching it and writing it, and I don't have an assistant. I don't have a team. There's no production staff. It's just me. So I think that as people discover it, there's been a lot of word of mouth. I keep constantly hearing people saying that they're telling their friends about it, and I think once a certain type of person listens, they kind of become hooked. And I've heard that a lot, where it's like, I found your show 3 months ago and I've listened to everything, where they've literally binged all the way through. And I've done over 1,000 episodes at this point.
I mean, I believe that. At the end of the day, too, you've made a very deliberate set of decisions, obviously. But one of them, and you've hinted at that basically, is that these are shorter, dare I say, more snackable episodes than a lot of other typical podcasts. Have you found that that's the best way to kind of take this mission head on, shorter versus exhaustive?
Yeah, and I didn't even know a lot of the benefits when I started. For example, if you've ever thought times where you've just kind of sat down and binged eaten something, it's usually when you're not even paying attention, but it's always something like potato chips or cookies. It's little things where you kind of just eat one after another. You don't binge on a porterhouse steak. It's this huge thing, and it's not like you're eating one after another.
Sure.
You eat one and you're full. And the ability to do small shows means that people can fit them into times where they may only have 10 minutes, on a commute, on a walk, while they're doing chores. I know personally, I have a couple daily podcasts that are in my queue. I always listen to them first because I can get them out of the way. If I have something that's a 2-hour show, I'm usually going to put it off because it's requiring me to make a larger commitment. And if you can get rid of my show and take it off your podcast queue right away, people, I think, are more apt to listen to it first. And I think smaller things are just more bingeable.
I'd agree with that. It makes a lot of sense. Similar to the question I asked you before about travel, you've done over 1,000 episodes, so I know it's also hard to pin down, but what were some of your most memorable either episodes or topics that you basically dove into on the show this far?
They tend to be smaller stories that maybe I heard about, and then as I did more research, one of the early shows I did was about Chief Joe Medicine Crow, who was the last Crow war chief. And war chief is not a title that's bestowed upon you. It's not elected. You have to earn it, and you have to earn it in battle. Well, since the 19th century, there haven't been a whole lot of opportunities for the Crow Indian people to earn things in battle. And you had to do 4 things. You had to touch an enemy in combat without killing them. You had to take their weapon. You had to lead a group of soldiers, and you had to steal a horse. Doing those things is difficult. Well, Joe Medicine Crow went into the Army in World War II and did all of those things, including stealing a horse. Actually, he stole 40 horses from an SS facility in Belgium where they were leading a raid on it. And he told his commander before they were going to start shelling it, it's like, let me go in and get the horses out before you start shelling. And he did exactly that. And when he came home and told the elders of his tribe what he had done in the war stories, they realized he had achieved everything and was given the title of war chief. And he ended up leading a very interesting life even after that. He got his PhD, lived to the age of 103, earned the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And it's just one of those stories that, a lot of people just aren't aware of.
That's amazing. That's part of the reason, that I think people enjoy your podcast so much. It's this type of thing where you do learn snackable content, you do learn a lot about amazing stories, and it's actually good for you. So unlike the junk food analogy we used before, it's actually a good thing. So not bad. I guess one other question I do have for you as well is that a lot of our listeners are basically podcasters who are just getting their start. A lot of the feedback we get from like commenters and other people, not only learning about Glassbox, but specifically the business of sound, is that they're very curious to figure out what tips or insights you might have to help them grow their podcast. They're serious about it, but as you know, it can be very discouraging in the early years. And I guess what sort of advice would you have for someone looking to kind of grow their franchise?
Most podcasts never even make it to episode 10. I think it's like episode 3 or 7 where most give up. And that's because most people, I want to start a podcast, and they have something they want to talk about, and they just want to talk about it. So they don't have a format, and it's not a priority in their life. They got other things going on. So when push comes to shove and things have to get put aside, the podcast always gets put aside first, and it always fails. I was in a position where I had to make this work. I had no choice. And when I first proposed this idea for the show to my friends who had successful podcasts, they all had the same reaction. 1, this is a great idea. I think it'll be a hit. 2, you're insane for doing this because this is going to be a tremendous amount of work. So I think that the key is when you're launching a show, you have to make a commitment to it. You can't just skip weeks. Or I know a lot. I hear people, it's like, oh, well, this is season 1. We're going to do 4 episodes, and then we're going to take 3 months off. And then we're going to come back with season 2, even though season 2 is exactly the same thing as season 1. Pick a format. You have to commit to it, and don't expect to see, serious results for a year and a half, maybe longer. And few people are willing to stick it out that long. And you're going to hit, I had points where like traffic plateaus. And when it plateaus, you get frustrated because you're thinking, oh, it's never going to grow. Nothing's ever going to happen. And you just have to be able to push through that. My show has kind of plateaued in the last few months, but that's okay because 1, it's plateaued at a high number. And 2, I know, like looking at other shows similar to mine, that there's reasonably, I could get 200,000 downloads an episode. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to probably take a few years for it to happen. But I know that's very reasonable for an independent podcast about history to achieve those sort of numbers because other people have done it. So I just need to put in the work and invest the time and money to promote my show to do that. And so that's why I'm not really frustrated right now, because I know that I will eventually do it. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Love that attitude. And to your point, I won't give it away, but your podcast achieves well over 1 million downloads a month. It's amazing. And so for that reason, your milestone is much higher than most. So congrats.
But I know 10 million is possible.
I believe so. I really do. I'm definitely rooting for you. And I guess to that end,
not going to be easy. May take a few years. I'm not going to say it's going to happen tomorrow, but I don't see any structural reason why that couldn't happen. I really don't. Especially because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that I still have to pick, including schools, homeschooling communities, various interest groups. I mean, there's just a lot of places I have yet to promote the show.
Exactly. And I guess to that end, too, to kind of like tie things together, you're part of the Glassbox media family. We're obviously like very enthusiastic about working with you, and we hope to be part of that solution towards you kind of hitting that number and growing. And again, this does put you on the spot, I think, to some extent, so feel free to speak your mind. But what has been one of the, more beneficial aspects of working, not just with Glassbox, but let's say with like a media partner?
Sales. The reason I ended up going with you guys is because you have a background in advertising, and you know that space. I had a consulting firm that I ran in the 90s. I was 25 years old when I started it. I grew up to 50 people in 4 years. So I'm still in my 20s. I sold it to a big international company. And the thing I learned was that the salesperson is probably the most important person on your payroll. They're worth everything you pay them because without them, nothing else happens. And I learned something else. I'm bad at sales. There are people who have a personality and they're the type of person that just can do sales. And I am not one of them. And I'm not going to try to put a square peg into a round hole. I know what I'm good at. I think I'm one of the few people that could do a show like mine, and of the people that could do it, most wouldn't do it. So that's where I think my comparative advantage lies, and I'm more than happy to let someone else handle sales who's experienced and has a background in it. So that was the biggest thing for me. My show is easy to produce technically. I don't have what we're doing right now is much more difficult than my show because it's two people in two different places. We're carrying on a conversation. There are ums and ahs. I don't have any of that. I have a scripted show by myself, so it just eliminates those problems. So yeah, that is the biggest thing. I think, and from a business standpoint, if a podcast is going to succeed as a business, you can have all the audience you want, but at the end of the day, there has to be sales. And just, in the few months I've been with Glassbox, when I first started with you guys, I was doing 1 million downloads a month, but most of that inventory was unsold. And now a few months later, I'm doing roughly the same amount, but the inventory is sold. And business-wise, in terms of revenue, it's just night and day.
Yeah, and I think we're just getting started too. Like, I can tell you this right now, that we have a great team, obviously, a lot of folks that are very passionate about building relationships with brands. And I think, honestly, the podcasting space, surprisingly, shockingly, is at least still in its infancy when it comes to monetization. So whether it's custom content, larger scale sponsorships,
I agree,
or spots and dots, you name it. So sky's the limit. That's part of the reason that's so excited about working with you.
We given the nature of my show, and this is kind of a unique thing with mine, is my show is literally about everything. So I have a wide range of things that I can do topics about, and we've talked about this. And given my background in travel, I think there's a big opportunity to work with brands in the travel industry. The key there is not necessarily selling them on me and my show. I think the key is really selling them on the idea of podcasting, because it's an enormous industry, and there are many others that still have not really put their toe into this water. And they need to become familiar with it. They need to think it's okay. And then once they become more open to it, then they'll probably dive in and start spending more money. But I think that's just a matter of time and working with them.
Couldn't agree more. And I guess with that in mind, we kind of wanted to wrap up and kind of kick over any final thoughts that you might have to you.
I spent 13 years running a blog, very popular social media accounts. I did all the things that quote unquote social influencers are supposed to do. Podcasting is such a better business, it's not even funny. I mean, it is so much better that I'm not constantly having to pitch people to do these social accounts. What I do is very straightforward. It's to the audience. It's very common sense. People are accustomed to a model where there's advertising on television and radio. So with podcasting, it's not like it's this foreign thing. Whereas opposed, if you're posting something on Instagram and you're, have a product in your hand and it's kind of fishy, like where you paid for it or something, this is very straightforward. Here's the ad segment of the show. Here are the advertisers that help make this show possible. Everyone gets it. There's no problem. There's no ethical quandaries about it. And it's just growing a show and marketing and promoting it is so much cleaner and easier. It's very easy to do. Whereas, with social platforms, you don't control anything. They could ban you tomorrow for some reason that's just or unjust. And I'm sure you've heard cases of this.
I've experienced it.
Every week or so, there's something popping up. And I'm just, my only regret is not having started sooner.
I hear that.
That's my biggest regret. And I got a lot of plans for what I'm going to do in the future. And in addition to just growing the podcast, I think my content is will translate very well to YouTube. And I'm not talking about this new YouTube podcast initiative where it's just renaming YouTube videos podcast, but doing a proper YouTube videos, given the scripts I've already written. Maybe I just do a little bit of I change the voiceover a bit. I think that could become a very successful channel. Newsletters, books. There's a whole host of things that I'm going to be able to do all around the central themes that I'm already exploring with the podcast. So I'm looking at it as a multi-dimensional business, even though the podcast is going to remain at the core of it.
I couldn't agree more. There's no greater way to grow a podcast company, or a media company rather, than via podcast. So preaching to the choir. That's awesome.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gary. And with that in mind, I want to thank everyone for listening to this week's episode of The Business of Sound. As always, this show is produced by Erica Miranda and Nick Kastner. New episodes are released every Thursday, and we ask you politely to leave a 5-star review to help support the show. Additionally, if you're interested in learning more about either The Business of Sound or Glassbox Media, please feel free to follow us on both LinkedIn and Instagram, ideally both. And once again, thanks for listening, and we hope to hear and see you in other episodes. Thanks again.